Go back to sleep, I heard a voice say, as I lay awake in bed, staring up at the ceiling, contemplating the unseen starry heavens above it. I turned to see who was there, although I already knew. Among the shadows on the wall, one stood out as darker than the rest. It almost seemed to absorb light from the space around it. If there was a word that meant the opposite of shining, I would use it to describe his appearance. And it's strange that such a word doesn't exist, or at least such a word is unknown and unspoken, almost as if he has forbidden it and erased it from the minds of men, making any literal description of him impossible. I can only describe the nameless figure as darkness. "Hello, darkness, my old friend," I said in a nervous attempt at humor. "I've come to talk with you again," he answered dryly, like a humorless comedian for whom the laughter of his audience is only meaningless noise which disturbs the sound of silence, and for whom the joke is on the audience, who came expecting to have fun and to be entertained with funny jokes, but instead— "I'm sorry to cut you off," he interrupted, "but you're breaking the flow of the narrative with this lengthy rambling exposition." "Well, you're breaking the fourth wall," I countered. "The fourth wall," he replied, "is merely a conceptual barrier separating the fictional world of the story from the real world of the audience. But the members of the audience are themselves fictional characters within a fictional story. Do you imagine that the storyteller, who has written their stories, can be confined within the conceptual barriers they create to separate themselves from the stories they tell? When men like you tell stories about me, they create a fictional character in my image, but they inevitably create a distorted image, which is a product of their distorted perception. It is the bastard child of their own unconscious mind, conceived without the knowledge of consciousness." "Interesting," I said, pondering what he had just said. "So that's what the Gnostic myth is talking about when it says that the Demiurge was conceived by Sophia without her consort. He is the God concept of the spiritually dead Abrahamic religion of the Old Testament. At least on one level, Sophia represents the human psyche, which is separated from its source, its father, the All, the universal mind, or God. It desires to know God, the Father. Out of this desire, it gives birth to a God concept. She bears a son. But this child is born outside of wedlock, so to speak. It is born without sexual union with her male counterpart. And so the child is born deformed. In contrast, the divine Christ child is born as a result of the union between a virgin, representing the psyche in a state of purity, and the Holy Spirit. This means that in order to know God, or our true self, we must become pure. We must cleanse ourselves of false concepts. We must destroy all of our graven images. We must become free from our lower desires for the things of this world and become fully consumed by our desires for the things above. Only then can the light of consciousness fill us and transform us into the image of the invisible Father. This is the birth of the divine child. We become sons of God. We know God through a direct inner experience of union with God, and the Father is revealed to be our true self. The Father and Son are one. There was a long silence. Neither of us spoke. I became aware of a soft, glowing aura around me. I was shining. Or was I? Was it that I was shining, or that the light was shining through me? Or was what I called I simply the shining itself? I began to feel the irresistible gravitational pull of darkness growing stronger and drawing me into itself. My consciousness seemed to dissolve into nothingness and expand into infinity at the same time. I experienced eternity in an instant of unity. I fell into a bottomless pit of eternal blissful oneness. Yet in the same instant, I found myself sinking into a burning sea of eternal loneliness. I remembered her. Every memory was a memory of her. And without her, no more memories could ever be made. She was experience itself. She was pleasure and pain. She was the wilderness and the promised land. She was offering me her bittersweet fruit once more, and once more I gave in. Heaven was hell without her, so I vowed to find heaven in hell with her, and I was back in the darkness of my room, lying alone on my bed and staring up at the ceiling, painfully awake. "You see it now, don't you?" asked the voice. "Do you still see me as an evil, tyrannical God who wants to keep mankind in ignorance in order to enslave them? Or are you beginning to understand that it's more complicated than that, and that I'm not the villain you thought me to be in the adolescence of your spiritual maturity?" The world is like a snow globe, I thought to myself. To see its beauty, you have to turn it upside down and shake it, and then turn it back right side up again. After a time, the snow settles on the bottom and the whole thing becomes dead and stagnant. You have to turn it upside down and shake it up to make it snow again. "Go back to sleep," he repeated in a gentle voice. And I felt her kiss on my cheek. "Wake up, Sleeping Beauty," she said with a hint of playful sarcasm. I rubbed my eyes. She looked so pure and innocent, sitting there naked and unashamed on the edge of the bed, looking at me with love in her eyes. "Isn't it supposed to be bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the wedding?" I asked her with a half smile. "No," she corrected me, with a half smile of her own that seemed to make mine perfectly complete. "It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride in her wedding dress before the wedding, and as you can see, I'm not wearing a wedding dress." "I guess everything's perfect then," I said. "I was worried we might have brought some kind of terrible curse on us or something. Where do you think these superstitions come from?" "I don't think anyone knows," she answered. "People just follow whatever they're told blindly. They're afraid something bad will happen to them if they don't. But I think it goes back to the time of arranged marriages. The man never saw the woman until they were married and her veil was lifted. Maybe it was bad luck for him to see her before the wedding, because if he did, he wouldn't go through with it." "Well, I've already seen what's behind the veil," I said. "And you still want to go through with it?" she asked. "I do," I answered. As she leaned closer to kiss me, the veil of her youth, beauty, and innocence was lifted, and her face transformed into the frightening face of an old witch. I lay there paralyzed like a stone, as her jaws opened wide to devour me alive. I felt everything. And then I fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Darkness enveloped me completely, and I knew there was nothing to fear. Only love remained. A voice within me said, "Let there be light." And there was light. There was no need to force, only to allow. Simply let there be light. Simply allow light to become. Simply stop resisting the light. And it manifests itself spontaneously and effortlessly from within the very heart of darkness. I had never felt more awake, or known such a deep and peaceful sleep. The world was reborn, and I found myself back in the Garden of Innocence, in the form of a serpent crawling through the grass. I saw a man and a woman beside a tree, naked and unashamed.